East. We're going to go to Beirut, Lebanon. Our good friend today, Anchal Vohra. Anchal Vohra is with us. She's live in Beirut, Lebanon, and Anchal is a senior writer in foreign policy, and she's also a senior correspondent for Inside Arabia. As you know, Inside Arabia, I cover the Middle East. My number one choice in the Middle East, go to InsideArabia.com, based in Washington, D.C. Anchal, great to have you with us.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Listen, Anchal, I want to start with this. You've got a piece in on Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com. The main reason that I wanted you on today, because we have followed the Syria situation. I'm one of the only people in radio in America that has followed this very closely since the outbreak of the civil war after the Arab uprising. It's been a long time, and you're covering Assad's war crimes, which are going on now, which is a trial that just began in Germany. A lot of Americans look at these war crimes and they're like, well, the war is still going on. He's got the backing of the Russians. Nobody toppled him. We don't want the U.S. to get involved. People like me that are isolationists don't want to get involved in Syria. Let them figure it out. But tell us what you find out. Tell us what is this based on, and what could potentially be the ramifications here?
Well, you know, what's happening here in the Middle East is, for years, a Syrian war has actually been going on. And I live in Beirut, in Lebanon, and I meet people. Now, I understand that you're in America and it's all fine. And you're all wondering what the hell's going on in Syria at the end of sort of 9 years of Syrian wars. Well, when you live right next door to Syria, you actually, over the last few years, I've been meeting so many Syrians, and John, it's not hard to find people who say, I've been tortured. It's not hard to find people who say, actually, I was picked up and I was taken to a detention center, come prison, and I was tortured there in ways that are hard to imagine for you and me. So these are sort of everyday stories when you live in this part of the world. And I can understand that for people back in America, it would be really, is that what's really happening? But actually, when you talk to people on the ground, apparently it has been happening with them. So this trial that's taken place in Germany has adopted a legal principle which is known as universal jurisdiction, which essentially came into being, and Germany adopted it back in 2002, and it did so it could bypass the International Criminal Court. Now, the International Criminal Court is essentially, if you have signed onto this thing which is known as Rome Statute, which is if you're a member of the International Criminal Court, then you can be tried there. Syria is not a member of the International Criminal Court, but the United Nations Security Council can request the International Criminal Court to take up these cases. So when the United Nations Security Council came into being, Russia and China sprung into action, and they said, look, no, this is our ally. You cannot have any jurisdiction over this guy and his regime. So that never happened. So Germany and other European countries said, this is not okay. We are going to be moral authorities, because Europe sort of every time springs up and says, we will not send our militaries, we will not intervene militarily, but we will have moral authority on the wrongs that are going on in the world. So Germany, in that sense, is taking a lead, and Germany is saying, we're going to bring to justice these guys. However, they cannot bring to justice the big guys. So what they're doing is they've got hold of these two guys. One is Anwar, who's a mid-ranking, or was a mid-ranking official in the Syrian regime, and you have the Ghazali, who was a low-ranking official and what many are describing an accomplice of Anwar. Mm-hmm. So they are trying these two guys and saying, these two men are in Germany, they're in our territory, and they have committed crimes against earlier refugees, but now Syrians living in Germany, and they're saying, we're going to give you justice. And that means taking these men to court. So this trial began yesterday on April 23rd at the higher regional court in Koblenz, a quiet city in Germany that is thus far known for, straddling two rivers in Germany, known as Mosel and Rhine, of course. And Germany is essentially saying, what have you done? We want to understand the crimes that you've committed, and the cases against essentially Anwar, who was a mid-ranking official, who essentially headed an investigations unit of one of the most notorious intelligence directorate known as Branch 251, and under his command, thousands of people were tortured. The charges against him are 4,000 people tortured, as a result of which 59 died, and at least one case of rape and sexual assault. So the severe charges against Anwar are, and that's the case that began in Germany. It's expected to go on for a year. Humanitarians are hoping that this is going to provide hope to thousands of others who've had the same experience, and at least 100,000 plus, John, and I say this with responsibility, many humanitarians saying 100,000 plus people who are still in Syrian prisons as we speak.
We're with Anchal Vohra. She is in Beirut, Lebanon. She is a senior writer of foreign policy around the world and a senior contributor for Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com, based here in Washington, D.C. Anchal, let me ask you this. How did two potential war criminals of the Assad government, Syrians, how did they end up in Germany?
That is a very interesting question, John. These men were in Syria, right? And they were doing what they were doing. And then suddenly they realized, and at a certain point in their lives, they realized that maybe that was not quite okay. Maybe they had a change of heart, or maybe they were just expedient and they thought it might be a better call to get out of this. Anwar, our story, I know because I've spoken to people who helped him defect. In September 2012, which is a year and a half into the Syrian uprising, he somehow, we don't know what actually occurred to him, but somehow he decides to leave. So the defectors say, well, we're going to welcome any defector, because at that point in time, the rebels were helping any Syrian regime officials defect, so they could sort of prove a point and they could say, look, the Syrian regime officials are also defecting. This guy, according to the people who helped him defect, told me, he promised them documents that could prove how thousands had been detained in Assad's prison, how they'd been tortured, how and what actually happened to them, did they even survive it. So he gets out of Damascus. He gets into then rebel-held eastern Ghouta, which is very close to the capital of Syria, Damascus, and then he finds himself in Jordan. From there, he sort of befriends the rebels, and he gets to Geneva, which is where the peace talks in those years happened, initiated by the United Nations. And then somehow he says, look, I'm actually not, interested in all of this. I actually want to get out of this. So send me to Qatar or send me to Germany. Being more interested in going to Germany, the rebels, hoping they will get some sort of evidence from this guy, or at least some of them, send him off to Germany. They procure the passport for him from the regime officials. Somehow they manage that because they have still links with the Syrian regime, and they send him off to Germany. Now that's in 2014. In 2019, February, he gets apprehended. That's where he's picked up by the German authorities as being this guy who actually was a part of the Syrian regime, a part of Bashar al-Assad and the Ba'athist regime's torture industry. He gets apprehended there, and this man then is sort of in the eyes of the German authorities, and the German authorities have a special unit, which is their war crimes police unit. They start looking into him and they say, this guy sounds suspicious. I mean, his story doesn't sort of add up. They start a case against him, and that's how this trial, which many humanitarians are describing as historic, began in Germany.
So he went through a defector hero to escaping Assad's regime, but part of the, what some people would call war crimes enterprise. We're with Anchal Vohra. She's in Beirut, Lebanon. She's live now in the Middle East. They're about 7 hours ahead of us. And she has a piece on Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com. This is my source for news and analysis in the Middle East. Is where I go, InsideArabia.com. You want to go there. Her story, Assad's war crimes in Germany. Let me ask you something. And you pointed this out in your article, which I thought, by the way, very, very detailed and well written.
Thank you.
You point out that, because you were trying to give all sides of the story here. You pointed out that in August of 2013, as part of the deal that was made with the U.S., that the Russian government made the Syrian authorities destroy their chemical weapons cache, and you were saying that about 1,300 tons were accounted for, But then you go on to say that Bashar al-Assad held some of those back in secret, and they were basically what he utilized for the barrel bombings where children were maimed and things of that nature that he blamed on the rebels. But we actually had people in the U.S. that didn't believe that Assad did that because, like, politically it didn't make any sense. The U.S. was pulling out of there. Nobody wanted to go in. Why would he do chemical weapons on his own people? How do you explain that?
Well, yeah, so this has been a big question. The big question has been this guy, and at that point in time, Assad is winning the war, so why is he going to drop chemical weapons on his own people?
Right.
But he's given up his weapons, so why is he going to drop chemical weapons on his people? Because he doesn't have them. So these were questions troubling all of us as journalists here as well. So we started digging, and we started observing all the trends that were coming up and how the subsequent chemical attacks happen. And of course you wonder, right, so if Assad has given up all his weapons, how are these chemical attacks happening? And if he's responsible, then why is he doing it? And after a long time, we figured out why that was. One, he didn't give up all of them. Second, he was doing it because he was essentially trying to scare people away. If you look at all of these chemical attacks, John, you will not see a high number of deaths. What you see is people who were hiding in their basements where the bombs couldn't reach. So when you drop a bomb, people are scared and they run off. But when they're hiding in their basements because they're expecting bombing, they go in their basements. But sarin gas and chlorine seep inside your basement, so people come out. They get scared. It's paranoia. And when they're scared, they run. When they run, then the rebels have no cause to be there. Then they're weakened because their essentially reason of being there is that they're supporting the civilians. When the civilians are not there, the rebels are weak. When the rebels are weak, the regime says, hello, what are you here for anyway? And now we're going to bomb you. And now it gives us a reason to bomb, to pulverize the entire residential area because there are no civilians. Because there wouldn't be many dead gives them sort of an upper hand to scare now the rebels away and get them to sign de-escalation deals, which means that now the rebels would give up their weapons and say, where do you want me to go? Russia says, go to Idlib, go to northwest Syria. That's where I'm going to go. So Assad gets the territory back. So they've used this, by they I mean the Syrian regime, as a fear tactic, as a war tactic, to pull the people out, the civilians out, scare them into leaving, and hence put enough pressure on the rebels to have them leave and have de-escalation deals signed with them so the territory can be taken back by Assad. So at the end of the day, Assad can say, I've got the territory back because at the end of the day, I'm just a Syrian nationalist.
So it worked.
It worked. Of course it worked. Because while we were all pondering, why would he do it? But he's given up his weapons, but why would he bomb his people? Everything that happened subsequently said that he did it. And it's not me saying it, because as a journalist, of course, we were all thinking, but how can I say he's done it? But several reports came from OPCW, which is an international watchdog looking at the use of chemical weapons, indicating that chemical weapons had been used. Now, could they have been used by rebels? It's possible, because ISIS was responsible, at least in the beginning, for some of these attacks. But the subsequent reports that came out said that the access to that material is not possible for any rebel group. And the last report that came out was a report of a special team set up by OPCW, because OPCW does not have sort of the mandate to look at or to blame who's committed the chemical attack. They would only say a chemical attack has happened. But the OPCW formed a specific body to determine who was responsible. And this body determined that in one of their first reports, which is a part of my piece, in Homs in Latamne, the attack that happened in March in 2017 was actually by Syrian regime's air force and their pilots. So they go on to say that, look, if this sort of an attack is happening and we confirm it's happening by Syrian regime pilots, then where are they getting their sanction from? Quote unquote, sort of, reading between the lines, from the regime.
Well, obviously, the order of that magnitude had to come from Assad. So the questions here to be answered. And by the way, we're with Anchal Vohra. She's from Beirut, Lebanon. She's live in Beirut right now. She's a senior foreign policy writer and a senior contributor to Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com, my source for all news, information, and analysis on the Middle East. It is my bookmarked first stop every day. Go to InsideArabia.com, based in Washington, D.C. So let me just ask you this, Anchal. So Assad, okay, so to get the vestiges of the civilians out of these areas that he wanted to get the geography back, they couldn't have a ground war and be, going into basements and shooting people. PR-wise, they couldn't do that. They couldn't bomb them into oblivion because that's all over the news. So they drop these chloroform barrel bombs. They seep into the basement. They don't want to kill the people. They want to scare them out of there. They run away. That then leaves no reason for the rebels to be defending the civilians because the civilians aren't there. Then without the civilians there, then Assad's military regime can go full-bore battle with the rebels and get them out and get the territory back. And then Assad can just throw up his hands and say, I'm getting my country back. I'm a Syrian nationalist. And all that makes sense. None of this could have been done, though, without Russian military compliance. Where do they fit into this?
Well, you've said it. It couldn't have been done without their compliance, without them being on board. We don't have evidence to prove that, but all the people on the ground that we speak to say that when they saw the Russian airplanes, when they saw the Syrian airplanes, they also saw the Russian airplanes. We had not heard anyone say that the Russian planes dropped chemical weapons, to be precise. But we have heard many, I don't even know if I have a number, but everybody I speak to, the Russian planes accompanied Syrian air power, backed by Russian air power, because essentially the war is being fought by Russian air power with Syrian troops on the ground. Maybe the chemical attacks, as the OPCW report suggests, have been conducted by Syrian Arab Air Force, which is Bashar al-Assad's Air Force, but Russians have been behind them, which kind of means that when the Russians told the Americans that Bashar al-Assad's regime has done away with the chemical weapons, either they didn't know, which I find hard to believe, or they knew all along that Assad has still kept a certain amount of stockpiles of chemical weapons and went ahead with those attacks. There is no way to prove it other than rely on the reports of the international watchdog, the team that the OPCW has found. We can believe them, and I would say we believe them, but Russia and Syria will still stand up and say, this is political. This is biased against us, and we haven't done it.
It's unbelievable. I mean, there's no way that the Russian military would allow this to go in, and certainly they were probably flying in envoys to protect the Syrian aircraft there that were going to drop these bombs. Obviously, they were part of this whole thing. But look, we've got a lot of people in America that really questioned the validity of these reports because politically it didn't make any sense. But now the way you explain it and you did in your piece, it makes perfect sense now what has happened. Look, Assad's not going to get overthrown, right? What happens now?
Well, Assad is not going to get overthrown, you're right, because Russia is backing him. But there are many people in Russia, and some of them that I've been talking to say, is Assad more of a liability? Because at the end of the day, what does Russia now want? Russia's invested so much in Syria. Russia wants to be a player in the Middle East. And Russia thinks, and a lot of Russian officials that I've been speaking to say, we've got an understanding with the US and we're working together in the Middle East now. And maybe that is a factor of Mr. Trump. We're partners in the region. But Russia wants to be able to have more oil deals, more energy contracts, more trade deals, and it wants to sort of do it in its own way, where it tells the dictators, we're okay with you. And so, yes, Assad is not leaving anytime soon. Unless Russia wants that to happen.
Exactly.
Unless Russia says Assad is a liability,
right.
Why don't we have another guy?
That's right.
How does it matter to us?
Yep.
If Russia says that, then things change dramatically. If it doesn't, then nothing is likely to change anytime soon.
Yeah, if they tire of Bashar al-Assad and it's in their strategic best interest, they have a long-standing alliance with Syria since the Second World War. If they tire of him and figure he's a liability, One day he's just going to disappear in the middle of the night, and there'll be someone else there. I want to thank. Great piece of reporting. You got to read this piece if you're at all interested in this stuff. And look, I was one of the people that really questioned. I really questioned, like, why would Assad be dropping barrel bombs on his own people when he's winning the war, and he's got Trump wanting to get out of there, and he's got all the Trump supporters like me that want out of the Middle East. Why would you just throw a flamethrower in that? Now it makes sense. This is why you have good reporting across the world. Fabulous job by Anchal Vohra. Assad's war crimes confirmed. The trial in Germany. Anchal, thank you for being with us. Go to InsideArabia.com, InsideArabia.com.